The New England Business Group presents It's All About Business. Our presentation today is Making Decisions Part 2. Welcome to the 7th presentation, Making Decisions Part 2 in the New England Business Group's pre-startup series. This session will discuss managerial decision-making for your business idea, while the entire 7 presentation series will help you evaluate your business opportunities so that you can reach a go, no-go decision. I am Larry Gable, President and CEO of the New England Business Group, and I will be your presenter today. Decision-making is especially important for management and leadership. Good decisions require a person to be and to bring a number of characteristics to bear, that is, experience, instinct, intelligence, alertness to changes in the business environment, good listening skills, and a willingness to react when necessary. Modern decision theory has identified processes and techniques to improve decision-making and the quality of decisions. Whether it's a learned skill or a natural talent, making good decisions can put a business owner on the path toward long-term success. Decision-making is more natural to some personalities, so these people should focus more on improving the quality of their decisions. People that are less natural decision makers are often able to make quality assessments, but then they need to be more decisive in acting upon those assessments. Good decision making requires a mixture of skills. That is cognitive development and identification of options, clarity of judgment, firmness of decision, and effective implementation. Whether the decision-making skill is an innate gut feeling or is learned over a course of years, the bottom line is that being a more effective decision maker requires practice. The New England Business Group has crafted the pre-startup process to help the entrepreneur organize thoughts and prioritize activities in order to optimize idea development and research processes, leading to a go, no-go decision based on knowledge, market research, and situational analysis. The result is an informed decision process that is geared to the realities of the marketplace. The net effect for the entrepreneur is to have acquired an enhanced information set upon which to build a business plan. The work and effort invested in business research and analysis is not wasted, but rather immediately useful in the development of the business plan. The decision module is the last of the 7 pre-startup modules. In this module, we discuss the processes associated with managerial decision-making and examine the elements that may be applied to that process. We will look at several decision-making models as well as a decision tool to help provide clarity in complex decision processes. At the end of this process, the entrepreneur will be ready to complete the idea evaluation process and make a go, no-go decision. Should that decision be go, the entrepreneur will have sufficient knowledge to enter the business planning process and create a very credible business plan. Whenever you see a successful business, someone once made a courageous decision. A quote from Peter Drucker, a management guru. Well, let's look at some decision-making models, and it kind of depends on the manager's personal preference and whether the decision is programmed or non-programmed, and the extent that the decision is characterized by risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. We have basically 3 decision-making models that we'll discuss. The model selection will depend on the personal preference of the manager, whether the decision is programmed or non-programmed, and the extent to which it is characterized by risk, uncertainty, and ambiguity. The 3 models are the classical model, the administrative model, and the political model. The characteristics, the classical model, is clear-cut problem and goals, no ambiguity there. Condition of certainty, and it's a full information about alternatives and their outcomes are available, and the rational choice by individual for maximizing outcomes. In the administrative model, there's big problems and goals. Things are not as clearly defined, as they are in the classical model. Then there's the condition of uncertainty and limited information about alternatives and outcomes. So this is a state where satisficing choice may resolve the problem using intuition. For instance, satisficing here, we will say that you would take the first acceptable solution rather than an optimal or maximizing, minimizing solution. And the third is the political model. It's pluralistic, where you have conflicting goals. It's in a condition of uncertainty and ambiguity, and there are inconsistent viewpoints and ambiguous information, and bargaining and discussion among coalition members are basically is the way that you reach a solution. So let's look at the classical decision model. Their traditional approach to understanding individual decision-making is based upon classical decision-making theory or the rational economic model. The classical view of decision-making has always integrated the concept of rationality and rational decisions within the whole process of discussions and prescriptions. The rational decision-making process is often suggested as a way in which decisions should be made, and it involves the following strictly defined sequential process. It begins with seeking to ask the right questions, continues by discovering creative answers, and finishes by making sure the chosen solution is valuable and useful. According to Huzinski and Buchanan, rationality is equated with scientific reasoning, empiricism, and positivism, and with the use of decision criteria of evidence, logical argument, and reasoning. And the rational decisions are decisions which are based on rationality. The advantage of the classical model is to indicate a rational approach that can be applied to the business of reaching decisions in organizations. Let's look at the administrative model. This is where we start to get into non-programmed decisions in conditions of uncertainty. The administrative model sees decision makers as people with varying degrees of motivation who are besieged by demands but have little time to make decisions and thus seek shortcuts to find acceptable solutions. Under the administrative model, a decision maker does not try to optimize but instead satisfices, that is, treats objectives as loose constraints that can tighten if there are many acceptable alternatives that fulfill those constraints. While optimization would require choosing the alternative with the highest value, satisficing requires finding the first alternative with an acceptable value, that is, an alternative with a value above a minimally acceptable level of a given constraint. Satisficing may lead to a reduced decision quality, but it saves time and effort. Satisficing is a dynamic construct. The aspiration levels of the manager and number of alternatives determine what feasibility and good enough solution actually is. It has been pointed out that satisficing is an appropriate, i.e., rational, strategy when the cost of delaying a decision or searching for further alternatives is high in relation to the expected payoff of the potentially superior alternative when you take into consideration the costs to extended search. It is questionable whether the optimum procedure is to search for the optimum value. So we look at again at the administrative model here in non-programmed decisions. Managers actually make decisions in difficult situations characterized by non-programmed decisions, uncertainty, and ambiguity. Decision goals are vague, rational procedures not always used, managers' search for alternatives is limited, and the managers settle for satisficing rather than maximizing solution. And intuition, it looks to past experience. Now let's look at the political decision model. It closely resembles the real environment in which most managers and decision makers operate, and it's useful in making non-programmed decisions where decisions are complex. There's disagreement and conflict over problems and solutions, This is pretty normal. So in contrast to the rational model, players in the political model, often referred to as incrementalists, do not focus on a single issue, but rather on many intra-organizational problems that reflect their personal goals. Decisions result from bargaining among coalitions. Unlike in the previous models, power is decentralized. This concept of decision-making as a political process emphasizes the natural multiplicity of goals, values, and interests in a complex environment. The political model views decision-making as a process of conflict resolution and consensus building, and decisions as products of compromise. When a problem requires a change in policy, the political model predicts that a manager will consider a few alternatives, all of them similar to existing policy. This prescriptive points out that decisions tend to be incremental, that managers make small changes in response to immediate pressures instead of working out a clear set of plans and a comprehensive program. The incremental approach of the political model allows managers to reduce the time spent on the information search and problem definition stages. Incremental decision-making is geared to address shortcomings in present policy rather than consider a superior but novel course of action. In the political model, stakeholders have different perception, priorities, and solutions. So now let's examine the rational process just a little bit more in the 6 fundamental steps of the rational process. Rational decision-making is a multi-step process that favors logic, objectivity, and analysis for making choices between alternatives. The 6-step decision-making process is based on thinking about, comparing, and evaluating various alternatives. Rational decision-making models are typically described as linear sequential processes. In other words, there are steps laid out for you to follow. Each step must be completed before you go to the next step, and occasionally it may be necessary to go back several steps to be more fully complete before you go forward again. Rational decision-making is a precise analytical process that organizations use to arrive at fact-based decisions. The rational model does not consider factors that cannot be quantified, such as the value of altruism. It also leaves out of consideration the personal feelings, loyalties, or sense of obligation. Its objectivity creates legitimacy, since the only bias it contains is the preference for facts, data, and analysis over intuition and mere desires. Let's explore the rational decision-making just a little bit deeper. Step 1, recognizing the problem or opportunity. The first step is to recognize a problem or see opportunities that may be worthwhile. A rational decision-making model is best employed where relatively complex decisions have to be made. Problem-solving skills are normally seen as reactive tools. That is to say, they're applied to existing problems once these have been identified. However, problem-solving can also be done proactively. The application of key questions to existing situations, even in the absence of obvious problems, can still yield benefits. Asking why and why not is perhaps one key to innovation and improvement. It can be argued that finding the right problems and defining problems as opportunities are 2 crucial steps missing from many problem-solving processes. The first step, and a crucial problem-solving skill, is to find the right problems to solve. This can be done by asking questions about the current situation. Follow this with questions about the likely future. The result is a proactive problem-solving which may just open the door to creativity and innovation. Frustration and unrest with current situation is often a good place to start. Remember that the key to this problem-solving skill is to ask, why not? Secondly, we need to identify alternatives. Identifying alternatives requires 3 distinct activities. First is gathering information, that is, what is relevant and what is not relevant to the decision. What do you need to know before you can make a decision or will help you make the right one? Secondly, you need to analyze the situation. What alternative courses of action may be available to you? What different interpretations of the data may be possible? And third, developing options. Generate several possible options. Be creative, be positive, continue to ask, what if and why not? So third, we want to evaluate the alternatives. Each alternative must pass 3 stages before it may be worthy of consideration as a solution. The first is feasibility. Is it financially possible? Is it legally possible? Are there limited human, material, or informational resources available? Secondly, it must be satisfactory. Does the alternative satisfy the conditions of the decision situation? And last, is it affordable? How will this alternative affect other parts of the organization, and what financial and non-financial costs are associated? So the manager must put price tags on each alternative. Even an alternative that is both feasible and satisfactory may be rejected if the consequences are too expensive for the total system. And fourth, selecting an alternative. You choose the best alternative which is actually the real test of decision making. Optimization is the goal because a decision is likely to affect several individuals or departments. And finding multiple acceptable alternatives may be possible, and selecting one and rejecting others may not be necessary. So explore the provisional preferred alternative for future possible adverse consequences. What problems might it create? What risks are involved in making the decision? Then, of course, we need to implement the chosen alternative. And managers must consider people's resistance to change. For some decisions, implementation is easy, and for others, it's very difficult and time-consuming. And operational plans are very useful in implementing the alternatives. Managers must also recognize that even when all alternatives and their consequences have been evaluated as precisely as possible, unanticipated consequences are still likely to occur. And number 6, follow up and evaluate the results. Managers must evaluate the effectiveness of their decisions. Did the selected alternative serve its intended purpose? If the implementation alternative appears not to be working, the manager has several choices. You could use another previously identified alternative. You could recognize the situation was not correctly defined to start with and start the process all over again. Or you could decide that the alternative has not been given enough time to work and should be implemented in a different way. In the rational model, the emphasis on cognition or thinking, there is little consideration of the individual or their internal body signals. Despite the fact that these kinds of models are taught extensively, recent research shows that people don't actually make decisions this way. The model remains popular due to the emphasis on educated and informed decisions. So let's also discuss the pros and cons of the model. Clearly, defining a situation and stating the required outcome can go a long way toward improving a situation. And another pro is research often gives rise to options previously not considered, and it is a simple process that works. Some of the cons include too much attention to detail in researching options uses time, energy, and effort, and beliefs and assumptions are mistaken for facts with unwanted consequences, and the search for the best option instead of an effective one may mean time is being wasted and decisions are not being made, and you're losing opportunities. Now, Let's look at decision styles. Differences among people with respect to how they perceive problems and make decisions. Not all managers make decisions the same way. There's a directive style, an analytical style, a conceptual style, and a behavioral style. So managers and leaders adopt different styles of decision making based on their personality, the situation they face, the culture of the organization, characteristics of the people they're working with, and the nature of the decision itself. According to behaviorist Isabel Briggs Myers, a person's decision-making style depends to a significant degree on how they think about and assess information, or what is called their cognitive style. While some are more comfortable with an objective analytical approach, others are confident in being guided by their feelings and emotions. People who trust information that is concrete and present will seek out the facts and knowledge from others, while those who rely on intuition and instinct may be more likely to make decisions without much participation from others. So let's look at the personal decision framework. If we start at the top and work our way down, we'll see that the initial situation is either programmed or non-programmed, and there are several approaches you can use, including the classic, administrative, and political, and then you move to your decision steps, which is influenced by your decision style, the directive, analytical, conceptual, or behavioral, and then you can move on to your choice or the best or optimal solution to the problem. So let's look at the directive style. This form of decision-making relies on a rational, autocratic style that results in the employee using his own knowledge, experience, and judgment to choose the best alternative. This type of leader is very rational, but thinks mostly about short term. The biggest issue in this style of decision-making is that it rarely does the leader have all the pertinent information to make an effective decision. Let's look at the analytical style. These are complex solutions based on as much data as you can gather. The analytical style prefers to use direct observation, facts, and data to determine the best outcome. The only issue faced using this style is that it is time-consuming, since every possible alternative is examined. Then the conceptual style. The conceptual style of decision-making is more concerned with long-term results, brainstorming of alternatives, creative approaches to problem solving, and taking higher risk. And generally results in some creative solutions. Then there is the behavioral style, where you have deep concern for others as individuals and you like to talk to people one-on-one. So people with a behavioral decision-making style work well with others. They're open to suggestions and they're concerned about the environments of their team. They generally try to avoid conflict and place importance on the acceptance by others. So how do we make better decisions? First, increase your knowledge. Ask questions, get experience, use consultants, do your research, and maintain your objectivity. Then use your intuition. It's a cognitive process whereby a person instinctively makes a decision based on his or her accumulated knowledge and experience. Then you can weigh the pros and cons. Quantify realities by sizing up your options and taking into consideration the relative importance of each of your objectives. Don't overstress the finality of your decision. Remember that few decisions are forever. Knowing when to quit sometimes can be the smartest thing a manager can do. And fifth, make sure your timing is right. Let's look at the decision matrix. It uses weights to provide adjustments for important criteria, and it's useful in comparing multiple criteria against multiple alternatives. A decision matrix is a list of values in rows and columns that allow a manager to systematically identify, analyze, and rate the performance of relationships between sets of values and information. Elements of a decision matrix show decisions based on certain decision criteria. The matrix is useful for looking at large masses of decision factors and assessing each factor's relative significance. So here's an example of a decision matrix. You can see that the criteria are on the left, and each criteria is weighted, which is a subjective evaluation of the importance of that criteria, and then each alternative is to the other alternatives on each criteria, and they can be anywhere from 1 to 5. But what you will do then is take your relative weight of the criteria times the assigned value of the alternative to generate a number. And you do that for each criteria, and then you sum the numbers for each criteria, or for each alternative for the criterias, and then you will come out with a value that can be ordered from high to low, the high being the most advantageous and the low being the least, based upon the evaluation of criteria. In summary, we've looked at decision-making models, we've done the rational decision process in detail, we've looked at decision styles, and talked about some of the ways to make better decisions. And then finally we looked at the decision aid, that is the decision matrix. Time for questions and answers. The question says, I have difficulty figuring out what it is that I want. This turns my decision-making process into an exercise in guessing at my preferences. Do you have any advice on how one can more easily discover his or her preferences? Well, knowing what you want is absolutely critical to making decisions. So if you don't know what you want in a particular decision situation, your initial effort should be to find out. The good news is that you have access to the source of all your preferences. It's in your mind. So next, you push your thinking by asking for each of the items on your list, why do I care about this? Then convert the item to a common form called an objective, where you use a verb and an object, i.e. have fun, make my spouse happy, increase my salary, lose weight, those types of things. For your decision, you then consider which of the objectives are most relevant and compare the alternatives on those objectives. The decision will involve making value trade-offs to select the alternative that best balances the achievement of your competing objectives. We have completed part 2 of step 7 of a 7-step process and should feel confident in evaluating our business ideas. In the next several sessions, we will step through the startup process and provide background information in business fundamentals.